The following radio show is live, except for the announcement you're hearing right now.
Welcome back to Your Island Live with your host, Tom Schilero on 103.9 LI News Radio.
And once again, welcome back as we're moving right along. We have the great Ken Bombace with us. Ken, here every Wednesday, 12:35 hour, talking about a lot of different things. We got so many different subjects and matter to talk about. We had Ken on in the morning. I believe it was Monday on LA in the AM. I was sitting in for Jay Oliver Monday and Tuesday, and Ken is doing double duty this week. It's always great to have him on and get the really benefit of his expertise. Ken Bombace, how are you, my friend?
Doing great, Tom. Thanks for having me on.
Always a pleasure. You know, we always have our topics, national topics, international topics. You have a criminal intel background, just so many good things to talk about. But, you know, it's all interconnected with Congress, with the state legislature and so on. The governor is now introducing her bill. We'll be talking about that with Rich Christ at the 1 o'clock hour. I understand she just submitted minutes ago a bill of the budget bill of $227 billion. And she mentions the bail reform and the migrants and banning gas stoves, which I can't figure out what the heck's that all about. But we'll talk to Rich about that. But the government is so important to the subject matter that you and I both talk about. And yet 1/4 of the people in Nassau and Suffolk County are not represented in the House of Representatives, and there is no telling when that may or may not happen. Santos, and again, talking about George Santos, and I wanted to bring it up with you as a former law enforcement officer and somebody who's certainly well versed on issues, state issues, national issues, international issues. This whole idea of checking off, I made a $500,000 loan, and then checking off, I didn't make a $500,000 loan, and we have $125,000 that came from somewhere. It's really, and I know a little bit about the FEC, the Federal Elections Commission, and so on. You know, they're pretty stringent when it comes to rules and regulations, and you got to dot every I and cross every T. This all happened since the Watergate years to make sure that campaigns are not funded in a very nefarious way. But this guy Santos is incredible. And of course, I had to laugh when he said on the news yesterday he was walking down the halls. That's the only time the news gets to talk to him. And they keep putting cameras in his face and essentially asked him, well, why did you quit the committees? He said he wants to clear his name. And the first thing that popped into my head is, what name? Which name does he want to clear? And I think he's got a tough haul. Just weigh in on this whole discussion, because there are people that are shortchanged. In the last couple of weeks, I had Representative Garbarino on. I've had Nick Lalotta on, and they're picking up the slack, but they can't represent his district. Your thoughts, Ken Bombace?
Yeah, so I mean, this is an embarrassment not just for Republicans and not even just for Long Islanders, but and people in his district, but for the whole country. Everybody sees this, and it's embarrassing. And I was listening, Tom, to your segment before I came on, and I agree. You know, with the parties, there isn't such a formal structure to do a due diligence on somebody who they're going to put up to run for office. Of course, if you're running for Congress, there'll be federal forms you have to submit, and that's what he's having some issues with right now. But as far as the vetting process, honestly, I think everybody dropped the ball. I think clearly the Republican Party did for having seen any of this, because it's so glaring and it's so obvious and transparent. And the other thing is the opposition party, they're almost more at fault, right? You would think that they would have done their due diligence to look into him during the election rather than after he won the election and you could have easily determined some of these things that seem like blatant lies. You know, it could have been a matter of hiring a private investigator just to do a general due diligence on him, which should be a part of any campaign, right? The media dropped the ball too. They never took the time to really dig deep and look into this individual as a candidate. And even the public, you know, people who are following this, whose lives are affected, we're all responsible for that. People take so much at face value and take so much to be truth. And in this day and age, you can't do that. I think you're correct in saying that there's not such a strong official vetting process by the party. But I'll tell you, this is something that has always, I thought, was crazy. When you think about it, a police officer has a more stringent official vetting process than the president. official process. That someone, here's what we have to go through for this due diligence. Think of all the things we later find out about politicians, but they never go through. I mean, to be a police officer in most departments, you're going through a stringent background check. And I mean one where they're not only doing criminal history searches, they're going to your neighbors and talking to them, but also polygraph exams. I mean, no politician has to do that anywhere. Psych exams, they don't have to do those either. Physical exams, everything that you have to go through to get better to be a police officer is far more stringent than someone who's going to have so much responsibility in our government. I think it's always been crazy to me.
Yeah, you raised a good point to that. Yes, I'm a police officer. The average department in this country puts an applicant, a police applicant, through so much more than we put any of our elected officials, including the President of the United States. And we've had embarrassing situations that have occurred. We had one time under Nixon, Spiro Agnew, the vice president. Many people probably don't even remember his name. This guy was taking cash in an envelope while he was governor of the state of Maryland. And it continued during the time that he was vice president of the United States. No one looked into that or any background or his business dealings and so on, which is why we passed all of these laws that should have reined in a George Santos. This guy was going to do anything. He was going to manipulate money to become the representatives from the 3rd District. So now the rest of the mechanisms like the FEC, U.S. Attorney's Office in Washington, D.C. and in New York, and the DA in, I know, Queens County and Nassau County are investigating him. He's set off a tremendous amount of investigations that are occurring, including the Attorney General of the state of New York. So all of this. And but I still go back to what I was saying, that the Constitution does not allow for a restriction on people who run for public office, just like with voting. Years ago, when we first set up the First Republic, white male landowners could vote and run for public office. Today, it's as long as you're a citizen, you're over 18 years old, you can vote. But I think you raised a great point. And the great point was, well, that's where opposition comes in. Yes, there's no formal vetting process. It would be up to the Joe Cairos in Nassau County and the Jesse Garcias in Suffolk County. And I know Chairman Garcia is doing that right now for the local offices for county executive and so on. They are sitting down. They are vetting the candidates because they want to be organizational candidates. They want to be chosen by the party. And not necessarily have to run in a primary unless somebody challenges them. But without that, as you said, opposition research. It's up to the opponent now. Who am I running against? And I happen to know Bob Zimmerman for many years, and he was George Santos's opponent. And this was a guy, self-made millionaire guy, built up his own advertising business. He's always had a love for politics. He was the Democratic National Committeeman from the state of New York. There's only 2 of them. So he's been involved in national politics for 30 years, 40 years, however many years you want to say. And so one would think that he had the wherewithal to do this. But I think what happened in that campaign, he raised $5 million. It's a lot of money for a congressional campaign. So, some of it should have been spent on who is my opponent? What does he have? And most of it was spent in building his own name up. And unfortunately, you'll have to give people something to vote for, which is you, but maybe something to vote against. And I think it would have been not too hard to find that out. And the other thing you said is the New York Times that wrote the article, why did you wait till after the election? And I asked the Times reporter that. They said it's not our job to win a campaign for anybody. And, they're right. It's not their job. Their job was to expose now somebody who's about to take high office. And I look at the members of the House. So I think you and I just did a good job in analyzing this whole thing. Ken?
Yeah. I would just add one thing, Tom. I would say that one thing's for sure. I think although the parties might not have an official requirement that they have to do this, it's going to change after this. I think everybody saw this, and a political party can waste a lot of money and resources and possibly lose a seat if they don't do the proper due diligence and invest in the wrong person. And one other thing I'd add is that some people might say, well, yeah, look at the backgrounds that I just mentioned, say, for government officials like a police officer, an FBI agent. And they might say, yeah, but look at in the aftermath of Memphis, how good is that system? Well, that system's actually very good because the percentage is so minute. It's microscopic out of the 50,000 police agencies and hundreds of millions of calls for service. And you look at the very small percentage of incidents like that. I think the system actually works pretty good.
I'm with you on that. Although there may be incidences, there's not a tradition of that type of policing in this country. And I'll argue that with anybody, anywhere, anytime. And even the president of the United States with his nonsense after that had happened goes back to his systematic violence. He didn't want to say systematic racism because he felt, well, wait a minute, I probably shouldn't do that because all of the officers involved were the same race of the individual who ended up being stopped and, of course, losing his life as a result of what would be considered illegal actions, tactical actions by those officers who made that stop. But he still talked about the systematic violence. And if anything turns my stomach more than is when I hear that, because you and I both know of the thousands upon thousands of acts of heroism that take place every day in this country by our officers that are well trained and that do the best they could to save lives. And that's essentially what they do. And the amount of officers that lose their lives every single week in this country. And when one incident like this happens, it certainly tears down the millions of officers and millions of incidences that go unreported or unknown. And that to me is sad. It's sad that that's happened. And I believe that if we can continue using what we've learned here in Nassau County and Suffolk County and New York City and somehow spread it to the rest of the country, cities like Memphis and departments that may be a little less in terms of the vetting process and the training process of their officers, that we can reduce that. But there's also the political end of it. And you know that. They wanted to use this. The far left wants to use this for their agenda of let's go back to defund. Let's take off the anti-crime units and so on. And we know how effective those anti-crime units were. They reduced crime in New York City amazingly low until de Blasio succumbed to the pressure of the far left. Oh my God, this is terrible. Let's stop taking 1,000 guns off the street every week, what anti-crime was doing, and resulted in an increase in crime. Now they went back to it, and now it looks like the Scorpion unit in Memphis is now a thing of the past, and they have one of the highest crime rates in the country, homicide rates in the country, and they have a lot to do with their policing. It's just a shame that this happened, and the political forces, the anti-cop political forces, are going to take over and cause more problems for us. Ken?
Yeah, I think that it's a huge mistake if this goes in a direction where they try, because there's been a lot of criticism about these specialized units, where they try and ban these on a wider thing. I know this Scorpion unit, I think they've already disbanded it. And, maybe rightfully so, just because that specific unit seems like it had some issues. And also it's been tainted because of this. But those units, like you mentioned, Tom, those are the most effective policing units that there are in fighting street crime. I mean, just like you said, in New York City. And that was a political decision to when they were targeting stop and frisk and the street crime unit. I mean, how many people who are regular people going to work, getting off the subway in New York City, were having their rights violated and being stopped and frisked? Nobody. These people were following a very strict guidelines to conduct those searches, and they were getting a lot of bad people off the street. They were getting guns and drugs off the street. It wasn't being abused, but it was a political thing, and it was a politically motivated decision to go after that. And all they want to do, the overall, is weaken the police, defund the police. Less is more, where they're trying to empty our jails and our prisons right now. The bail reform, which has crippled the criminal justice system. I mean, there's so many things. That is a progressive move to do that. And if these units, the ones that are targeting the worst people, we've talked about this, Tom, it's a very small percentage of people in society that are committing the vast majority of crimes. Those street crime units, those are the ones that target those people. Those are the ones who aren't tied to a radio going 911 call to the next call to the next call. Those are officers who have nothing to do but focus on the worst people in society, and it's effective. And the average person doesn't know how effective it is. And I think it'd be a shame if something like this is going to lead to departments across the country being pressured to disband those types of units.
And you're going to see that. There's no doubt. Of course, you and I both watching the news every day. Today's the day that they're burying Tyre Nichols, and of course, receiving national attention. The Vice President of the United States is going to attend. What I found the most distasteful is that from listening to some of the politicians, the far left politicians that hate the police, that hate the system, that want to disband every police department. You got AOC saying that jails are the cause of crime. We need to shut down all our jails. We don't need police officers. We need social workers. You and I have both heard that. And that happened right after George Floyd. And then they saw crime rates shoot up in Baltimore, Chicago, New York now is a crime city when it wasn't. It was the safest city in the United States of 1 million or more. It was the AOCs and it was the Bill de Blasio's that brought about changes in programs all over the George Floyd situation. So then we had to get through that, just like we had to get through COVID. And it looks like it was turning around. It really did. That they were now, you saw even liberal politicians saying, look, my neighborhood, my constituents are telling me they can't walk out of the subway anymore because they're being accosted or carjackings on the rise. We need more police. And I finally started to breathe easier. Then this takes place and it starts all over again. And I think I finally realized that this is now going to be a fight because when they identified, and I don't mean to offend anybody, folks, I'm about to say, but they identified one white police officer who was there. And I saw the left-wing media then jump on that and say then it is now a racist situation because there was a white police officer that was there out of the 10 that were not. And as soon as I saw that, they now have their opening, and that's their opening to defund, and that we live in that type of systematic racism and so on. And folks, you and I both know that this is not the case. But when I saw that, and I saw that they used that one officer as the shining example of what we've been saying, you realize the ridiculousness of all of this and that there are answers to what happened on that day in Memphis. And the answers can certainly be solved within policing, within the system itself. Thoughts, Ken?
Yeah, I mean, it's a progressive move that they've done this. And it's so crazy that, it seems like prior to maybe 3 or 4 years ago, our country did a great job in moving to a point where the idea is to have race never be an issue, have it be invisible, not to bring it to the forefront in every single thing we do in our schools, in our classes, in our government offices, in policing. Everything we do, there has to be this. The first issue that has to be addressed is race right now. It's almost like we made this just perpetual issue that we'll have to deal with forever, whereas the idea is to have it not be an issue. It should be invisible in our society. I thought we were pretty good in that direction in the United States. And it seems like it's actually done the opposite of what they might have thought they were doing. And the problem is they keep pushing in that direction. And I think we see it in the criminal justice system too. This Memphis incident, this wasn't a racial issue, but and that's why it didn't get, in my opinion, Tom, that's why it didn't. We were all preparing, right? Mentally, we're like, this is going to be bad. There might be civil unrest. And there wasn't, not like people expected. It was almost entirely peaceful civil unrest here. But it's because they determined that it wasn't there was no in to do that, right? When you think about Black Lives Matter, I mean, look what happened to a black man. They should have been outraged and should have had a much larger response. And I'm not saying civil unrest or violence. I'm saying at least it seems like there was almost none. And it should be to them not even an issue. It should be the same exact thing because a black man's life was taken. But because there was no underlying bias there or race issue that they could use, it wasn't. The same thing in Chicago. That's why they're not active, always protesting. That should be the epicenter of organization of BLM, because that is where, it's like we have more young black people being killed every single day, every weekend. You see the numbers stack up, urban areas like that one. But because there's no underlying race issue, they're not interested in it, and that shouldn't be. It's had an effect on our society and even our criminal justice system.
Exactly, and it's so well put. The number one cause of death among young black males in this country under the age of 25 is a homicide, and it tends to be intraracial. And I know the leadership in this country should address that because that's a horrific number, and that the city should have to deal with that. But believe it or not, we're out of time. Ken Bombace, appreciate doing double duty this week, and we'll talk to you again next Wednesday, my friend.
Thanks, Tom. Looking forward to it.
Okay, we'll take a short break. When we get back, the budget is out. Let's see what the state is making us pay for. We'll be right back.